Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Welfare Clinic, which is a brand new show, the show where we will be discussing about anything to do with welfare, such as housing, welfare benefits, how is affecting local community, how is affecting the families and the vulnerables in our society. Often also how the government policies also is affecting our community. And we will bring different guests in every show with the expertise and the knowledge in the field that we will talk about. Today we are going to talk about housing. As you would know, housing is one of the biggest issues affecting all communities, from whether it be from Tower Hamlets or anywhere else. And some of the new legislation and the policy the government is introducing, we believe that will have even more significant effect in our communities and the future generation. I have a guest with me today who is, I would say, expert. He may disagree with me, who's been in housing field for 25 years, done his PhD in housing, so technically he's a doctor, and I'm going to introduce my guest, and we will ask him questions related to housing and how our communities and people can get support and from where they can get support. And I think it's absolutely important that our community actually understand the significant impact that it will have on them individually and also their family, more importantly. And a lot of people we know are suffering in silence, don't necessarily know where to go and get the help and the support they need. So I'm going to introduce my guest. He is Glyn Robbins, who is also very active in the community and have been supporting whether it be Bangladeshi community or non-Bangladeshi community in various ways, and been around in the community for many years. And as I said before, he's been involved in the housing industry for very long time. Glyn, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ollie.
Obviously, Glyn, one of the issue that, as you heard, housing is the biggest concerns for many people in our community. How do you think we can resolve or come out of that crisis in terms of the housing crisis that people are faced at the moment?
Well, I don't want to get too party political about it. I'm not a member of a political party, so I should just say that for the record at the outset. But in his first speech as leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn said there's no solution to the housing crisis that doesn't begin with council housing. And I agree with that absolutely. It's what I've been saying for many years. I'm a supporter of an organisation called Defend Council Housing. And I think if we just think about Tower Hamlets and the rest of East London, what we've seen in the last, it's been going on for 30 years really, possibly a bit longer, is the steady erosion of council housing. When I first started working in this borough in Tower Hamlets on the Isle of Dogs, very interesting, some of that history, which perhaps we could talk about. A lot has changed since then. Massive amount have changed, and well, we could talk about how the housing shortage sometimes feeds into racism. But going back those 25 years to when I first started working in housing on the Isle of Dogs, at that time, 85% of the people in Tower Hamlets were council tenants. I think some of our younger viewers would find that hard to believe, because in our borough as well as throughout the country, council housing has reduced from being something that at the end of the 70s a third of the country's population lived in to now around 8–9%.
Why did that happen? Why has it reduced in the council?
Essentially,
because obviously clearly that was benefiting the local communities.
Well, I think so. I think it's a political, ultimately housing comes down to politics, in my opinion. Obviously, if you're overcrowded, if you've been on the waiting list for years, if your flat is damp, if you've got a rogue landlord or a slumlord, as I like to call them, maybe talking about politics isn't where you want to be. You know, you want to be talking about, well, how do I solve my housing problem? But actually, in the wider context, housing comes down to politics. And the relentless attack on council housing that's been going on since 1980 at least is the product of political decisions and political hostility, and both parties, or both government parties at least, i.e. Conservative and Labour, have essentially joined in the attack. And so it's been a series of measures. Most people in what you call the industry, most housing experts, if we're going to use that term, trace the decline back to the right to buy in 1979, which was introduced by the Thatcher government. It was extremely popular politically. Certainly from my work perspective, I think there are a lot of problems with the right to buy, but it's very important that we talk about it now, because actually the right to buy has led to the loss of 2 million homes in this country. Yes. That's 2 million genuinely affordable, secure, publicly accountable homes.
We will actually come to right to buy, because obviously that's another factor, and obviously the new legislation coming in regards to right to buy when it comes to housing associations, property. But I just want to go back. Obviously, this is a non-political show. It's about people getting the right kind of advice that they need so they can support themselves, but also support others. How do you think the people can get involved, or what can they do to persuade, whether it be their local councillors, member of parliaments, or whoever, to support their way of thinking, rather than just accepting what being decided on their behalf?
Well, I mean, the reality is we would never have had council housing if our forefathers and foremothers had not campaigned and fought for it. You know, these kinds of concessions, so-called the welfare state, more generally the National Health Service, these things are not given by governments or by the establishment willingly. They're given in the face of political pressure. So I think to win some of the important battles ahead, particularly around the new housing legislation that you've referred to, we have to start organising. But this is now quite a critical moment, because, as you've indicated, the threat that's currently in our face, which is in the form of what's called the Housing and Planning Bill, it's currently in Parliament, isn't only going to affect council tenants, it's going to affect housing association tenants as well. It's going to affect the services that both sectors receive. It affects private tenants, it affects travellers. It's going to change the landscape of housing in this country for the next generation unless we do something about it.
You also mentioned that people waiting for many years to get a property. I'm sure you have come across people where they've been on waiting list for 10 years, 15 years, possibly even for 20 years in some cases, which may be exceptional to that long, but people are suffering. Properties are getting smaller by the day. It is getting more overcrowding. You know, in some properties in one bedroom you got 5-6 people sleeping. You and I both have seen those properties. What can people do it's a very difficult question, but what can people do to get themselves into right sort of properties? What action can they take? Obviously within law, what sort of action can they take that would benefit them?
Well, I mean, it is getting hard. Alongside the more general cuts in services, rights to housing are being eroded as well, and the rights that we used to have are not there anymore. But that said, from a very practical point of view, I would always recommend that people go on the housing register. Now, a lot of people will say it's a waste of time. It used to be a right to be on it. It's not so much of a right anymore. But I think anyone who is in need of housing, whatever their circumstances, should still go to the local council and put their name on the housing register. There are some conditions around it these days, but if they are accepted onto the list, then they are at least in the queue. And you have to be in the queue. And I'm afraid getting genuinely affordable housing in places like Tower Hamlets now has become a lottery. It is a lottery, but you won't win the lottery if you haven't got a ticket. So you need to be in the queue.
But a lot of the boroughs not even building any housing.
No.
So obviously people living in those particular boroughs obviously would find it far more difficult, I guess, about even if they were on the waiting list, if there's no property to give.
Well, demand massively outstrips supply for genuinely affordable housing. That's why we have in Tower Hamlets 20,000 people on the housing register, and I think that's almost certainly an underestimate. 300,000 people across the East London boroughs. So you're right, the fundamental problem, the fundamental reason we have the problem is that we haven't been building enough homes. We're building fewer homes than we have at any period during the last 100 years or so. You would have to go back to the 20s to find a period when we were building fewer homes. And it isn't just that we're not building enough homes, we're not building the right kind of homes. And I think all of your viewers would recognise when I say that in Tower Hamlets in particular, actually, we've had more homes built not only than any other area in the country, but actually in any other part of Europe. But what kind of homes have they been? Well, too many of them have been private luxury apartments for people who can afford £500,000, let's say. And too often that's happened with the agreement of our local councils. And what I think we need to start doing is changing that and saying to our councils, and this goes to your question, we demand that where there is new development in our area, there is a suitable amount of genuinely affordable housing.
One more question that I want to ask you. Obviously, a lot of people, due to current economic climate, a lot of people getting in rent arrears, not able to pay their rent. Benefit cap is also affecting. And we know with some of the registered social landlord, if you miss your rent for a few weeks, notice of eviction coming in. Where can those people go to seek help and support so that they are not thrown out on the street?
Well, you may not thank me for this, but they should certainly contact their local councillors. But also, people in Tower Hamlets should contact the Tower Hamlets Tenants Federation, which is an organisation that meets regularly. It represents both council tenants and housing association tenants, but also private sector tenants. The Tower Hamlets Tenants Federation is very well organised. It's run locally by tenants, for tenants, and anyone who is a tenant in whatever sector should contact the Tower Hamlets Tenants Fed.
There's also a leasehold association as well.
There certainly used to be. I'm not sure if it's still operating actually.
Okay.
They used to have an office down in Wantley Market. Now I'm not sure if they're still going or not. There are sources of help for leaseholders. Not so much through the Tower Hamlets Tenants Fed, but I'm sure the Tenants Fed could guide people in the right direction. But there are various organisations that would help leaseholders. Again, I think the point is we need to recognise what we have in common around these questions. Now, you know, you've raised leaseholders. Leaseholders have a slightly different, well, no, a significantly different relationship to their landlord, obviously, than do tenants. But, you know, a lot of leaseholders are losing out now. Yeah. So the thought that the government wants another generation of leaseholders exercising the right to buy, you know, I think we're just storing up problems for the future. We're going to lose even more genuinely affordable homes. So we need to combine, we need to work together and organise together to demand essentially what we have to have is a situation in which housing is not just a thing about profit, not just a thing about making money. It's a thing about where you bring up your family, it's a thing about where you study, it's a thing about where you meet your friends, it's about community. It's not just about making money. So we want housing for need, not greed.
Absolutely.
But no, I mean, you've raised the question of advice. I said that the Tenants Fed is one source. There is still some legal aid supported advice in various law practices. I believe Tower Hamlets Law Services, Law Centre is still operating. There's some good solicitors around. It's very, very difficult these days, and we shouldn't, you know, give any false ideas.
But you certainly will advise people not to suffer in silence and to seek support and advise wherever they possibly can from.
To not hide away from the problem. Go and get advice, whether it's from your local housing office, your councillor, from the Tower Hamlets Tenants Fed, from the Law Centre, but go and get advice because the problems won't go away, and in actual fact what happens is they get worse because they feed on each other.
Yeah, no. Thank you for coming in to talk about the housing situation, and I think this is an issue that we probably can talk about for hours. And there still won't be end to it.
We need to stop talking and start doing on it.
Yeah, I guess so. But thanks for coming in, Glyn. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure my viewers will significantly benefit from your advice and the knowledge. And I'm sure we'll have you back here again talking about more about housing. Thank you very much. Dear viewers, we are end of our show. I hope you have benefited from our guest today regarding housing. As you know, as I said before, housing is one of the biggest issues affecting our communities today. I have no doubt we will be talking about housing many more times in the future. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join us again next time.